has been tools and techniques that have taken our ancestors from the Stone Age to the modern, industrial, and increasing digital world of the 21st century. A number of years ago, I visited a cave in the small town of Mossel Bay on the south coast near to Cape Town. And in this cave, there was evidence of heat treatment of rock to make stone tools dating back to more than 100,000 years ago. It was an early version of human beings applying heat to make tools and equipment. And that's the foundation of this sector. Archaeological evidence show us the use of iron in southern Africa close to 2,000 years ago, with the Iron Age starting in the year 200 of the Common Era, and great urban establishments like Mapungup were using tools and techniques. And you know the story of the steel industry in South Africa. Off the back of the expansion of mining, steel and all of its derivatives formed a base here in what was then the Witwatersrand. And over the years, the industry grew, and today is an important moment for that broader sector, steel, metal fabrication, and engineering, as we come together in this symbolic partnership by the owners of capital, by entrepreneurs, by workers, and by policymakers. In June 2019, 25 years into our democracy, President Cyril Ramaphosa addressed the nation from Cape Town, from Parliament. And he spoke of a new vision for South Africa, underpinned by what he called a reimagined industrial strategy. The basic idea behind that vision was that we needed to rebuild the productive economy, particularly the manufacturing base, into an advanced sector. Steel, as you know, is the backbone of manufacturing. Globally, by far the most important input, volume, value into key economic sectors. Yet over a number of years, the steel industry faced deep challenges. Some of the roots of the crisis were found in the rapid expansion of steel making in parts of Asia after the 2009 global economic crisis, which resulted in a global glut of steel that put enormous pressure on plants here in South Africa, but across the world, and governments began to scramble to see who could save their steel industry. This was aggravated by high and rising energy costs here in South Africa, together with load shedding. There were other uncompetitive cost structures, growing imports that eroded the volumes required to run resources that should have built more power stations, more rail lines, more hospitals, all of which would stimulate demand for steel and other products. In the local steel industry, hard lobbying became more prominent. Between, in the one corner, a strong protectionist argument, and in the other corner, the free market proponents. There were public commentators who argued that upsteel steel making should simply be written off. Yet others had the view that South African manufacturing was fundamentally uncompetitive and we needed to walk away as a country from manufacturing. And yet, the evidence from across the world was different. It was evidence that countries were looking at rejuvenating their industrial bases. That everybody recognized that manufacturing, even in the modern age, particularly in the modern age, was an important component of a balanced, strong, and a growing economy. Faced with these crises, government responded initially with efforts aimed at defending the industry. Call it the defensive strategy. We put in place measures to promote domestic access to steel through scrap metal price preference systems for local firms. Some foundries began to recover and new steel mini mills were established. Part of the Score Metal Group, initially bought by the IDC to prevent its closure, found new investors and began the journey to turn around its fortunes. And we see the result today, not very far from here, with a establishment, a major steel-making business that is able to produce steel at competitive prices. Highveld Steel in Mpumalanga reopened parts of its manufacturing works and used the industrial infrastructure to become a diversified industrial hub that went beyond steelmaking, now employing more than 1,600 workers. And shortly an announcement will be made that will indicate further parts of steelmaking in Highveld Steel reopening. But let's call them green shoots. These green shoots came in an environment that still had many obstacles to the growth and stability of businesses. And it was clear that we needed to move from a defensive strategy to a more forward-looking strategy in which we identify new market opportunities. Now, the President, in his inaugural State of the Nation address, spoke about the importance of a productive economy and the need, as I mentioned earlier, for a reimagined industrial strategy. And at the heart of that strategy is not some clever idea, it's partnership. It's the idea that government cannot run the steel industry, that businesses on their own will not be able to survive in a highly globalized and deeply competitive world, that labor simply using the traditional tools were not going to get a better quality of life for its members. That's by bringing these three together, recognizing that there are challenges and difficulties, but bringing them together and forging a common vision was the only way forward. And it's in this context that I convened a meeting with industry on the 20th of August in 2019 to put the question to captains of industry, to labor leaders, and to government officials. And the question was, are you and we prepared to work together very differently to what had been the pattern in the past, and to forge a new partnership, one that requires each party not to ask what others can do, but to recognize what they too must do to change, to bring something tangible and concrete to the renewal of the industry. Some of you were present at that meeting, and you'll recall that crowded meeting in the pre-COVID age at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And that meeting took the form of so many engagements in the sector previously. There was criticism, there was blame, there was finger pointing by one part of the value chain at another part of the value chain. But by the end of the meeting, everyone recognized that the old way of doing things would result in the old outcomes. That if we keep doing what we've always done, we will get what we always got. And all parties committed to work to a new and common vision. We appointed Dr. Bernie Vanderhoff in January 2020 to facilitate a discussion between stakeholders, asking all parts of the industry for their proposals to make the industry more sustainable. And doing that, and as Doron Barnes indicated, we said, think of an industry plan like a bring and braai. There are no free riders. You're not invited to come unless you bring something. Because by everybody bringing something new, we can make the industry have a different future and a different outcome. 2 months later, just after we had appointed the facilitator, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country. And for a number of months, businesses and government battled to avoid massive loss of lives. In this period, though, the talks on the master plan continued. The COVID-induced lockdowns came as a blow to local industry. Many of the businesses were pained in that period. But at the same time, the country hunkered down to build local industrial capability to deal with the health challenge. So let me deviate for a moment on the steel story and reflect on what we did. Because it offers lessons and hope for manufacturing as a whole. At the start of the pandemic, we had limited capacity to make medical grade face masks and ventilators and hand sanitizers and vaccines. And we tried actively to procure these on global markets. And we struggled. At the same time, we brought together South African innovators and industrialists and began to look at how can we locally ramp up production. Today, we have a new industry that has an annual output of well over 10 billion rand. And it's been created in the COVID period. We increased production of these medical grade face masks that frontline health workers use from about 6 million units a month to over 17 million units a month in less than a year. We worked with Sasol to shift that more of its ethanol would be used to allow small and medium-sized businesses to produce hand sanitizer. Some 20,000 CPAP ventilators were designed, created, built here in South Africa and used in public and private hospitals. And Aspen began production of the J&J COVID vaccine at its new Gqeberha plant. In fact, South Africa was able to export more than 2 billion rands worth of these medical products to the rest of the African continent. Now, what they show is that in moments of crisis, if we use partnership and we draw on South Africa's strengths, we can change our trajectory and our storyline. I left the steel story in mid-2020, so let me come back to that story and say that by October last year, a draft document had been put together as the basis for engagement. We got voluminous feedback from business and from labor. And by February this year, we had made sufficient progress to say we can approve and sign off on Steel Master Plan 1.0. And we chose the name 1.0, recognizing that a Steel Master Plan must be flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances, new opportunities, new problems that will be thrown at us. We set out the South African Steel Council with about 35 participants drawn from all parts of the industry. They included manufacturers, organized labor, and public sector officials. And at the initial meeting, we said, let's begin now, roll up our sleeves and implement. And we refine as we implement. We build as we implement. As we were finishing the Steel Master Plan, we did some parallel work in other parts of government to help create the conditions for the Steel Master Plan to be successful. First, we worked with neighboring countries and other African countries to finalize the terms for the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area, recognizing that a market of 60 million people, which is the South African market, will never be big enough for you as businesses to get the scale required to run large and successful businesses. We reached agreement on the rules of origin for most products in the steel industry. We put in place the legal modalities and published documents as thick as the old phone books were, setting out those provisions last year. And we're now getting ready for the start of trading because we've asked countries now using that legal framework to put offers on the table to each other. And what the African Continental Free Trade Area will do, it comes with risks and it comes with a big opportunity. And the opportunity is scale, selling to many more players. Second, we developed a new partnership with the private sector and across the three spheres of government to revitalize the national infrastructure plan. We recognize you can't build a modern, sustainable industry if you don't invest in infrastructure. And we had lost some of that initiative and traction that we had 10, 12 years ago. Third, the first steps were taken in the restructuring of the South African energy industry, starting with the cleanup at Eskom and recognizing, as others have said, Ivan said this and others have spoken about it, the centrality of energy to the steel industry. Fourth, government revised and refined its trade policy, tariff measures, scrap metal measures during the pandemic last year to provide some breathing space for local players, while pointing to the work that needs to be done for a more comprehensive solution. Fifth, we concluded agreements at NEDLAC on a localization compact, and the President announced the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. And at NEDLAC, we put a basic proposition on the table that was supported by the business community and by the unions and community organizations. And that was, South Africa imports about 1.1 trillion rand of non-oil goods. 1.1 trillion rand. That's equivalent to 25% of our GDP. That's significantly higher what other countries do. It's higher than what BRICS countries do, China, India, Brazil, Russia. It's higher than what highly developed economies do, the United States and the European Union. And therein lies opportunity for us. And we agreed at NEDLAC that 20% of that non-oil import bill over a 5-year period should be localized. If we successfully do so, that amounts to 200 billion rand of additional value created in South Africa, expanding our GDP by some 5 percentage points. And finally, we promoted fresh investment in the economy, working with investors to see how do we roll out. Ford Motor Company made the biggest commitment in its history in South Africa, in its 98 years here. It committed to 16 billion rand in investment just to expand its own plant here in Tshwane. And its co-investors through component manufacturing said they will establish new manufacturing capabilities next door in the special economic zone. And the factories are being built right now, and that we anticipate would be a further 4 billion rand. Others came forward. PepsiCo snapped up Pioneer Foods. Amazon Web Services opened a major cloud storage facility. And as foreign investors entered the local market, domestic investors realized that there is traction here, there's opportunity here, that jobs can be created, value can be added. Now, in the steel industry, Steel Master Plan 1.0 is intended to establish a stable and predictable trajectory for the industry so that business and investors can invest with confidence in building up the productive capacity, in bringing in innovation, in expanding skills, in utilizing South African expertise. There are 3 broad pillars around which a number of proposals are directed. First, the need to improve demand for locally made steel and its downstream products. Second, measures to strengthen the competitiveness of the sector through supply side changes. And third, some cross-cutting measures to promote the broader stability of the industry. You know the detail of this. On the demand-enhancing mechanisms and measures, they include infrastructure development, import replacement opportunities, new product value chains. We're working with the auto sector, the green economy and mining equipment, and of course export promotion. The supply side, there's a pack of measures from addressing competitive primary steel pricing to import cost reduction in the value chain around transport and logistics, energy, iron ore pricing, industry and product standards, R&D and innovation, resource mobilization for investment, and training of workers. The cross-cutting areas cover industry cohesion and a new steel industry development fund that we want to launch, and transformation in the sector. The master plan had difficult moments with widely divergent views among industrialists. In a complex industry like this, faced with the big challenges that you have in running your businesses, on the pressures domestically and globally, no single document can solve all of its problems. It's leadership that's needed, hard work, the preparedness to think long term, and to develop greater levels of trust between customers and suppliers, between manufacturers and labor, between government and industry. Trade unions and workers need to embrace the need for productivity, quality production, and industrial performance. Investors and managers need to embrace the need for decent work, fair labor standards, and an environment in workers feel that they too benefit from the growth of a sector. Upstream industries need to recognize the importance of competitive pricing and reliability of supply. Downstream users need to recognize how important it is to have supportive relationships with their suppliers through tough times and good times. They're not taps that can be turned on and off during times when global prices are low. You switch off your domestic supply, but when global prices are high, you wish you had a domestic supplier. Government needs to recognize that we are there to service industry, that we need to become more agile, more flexible, more able to be a problem-solving partner with industry, not standing, wielding regulation, but standing, working in partnership with entrepreneurs and with workers in building the sector. So we've identified a number of practical steps over a 3-year period to achieve this goal, and we've created the Steel Council. It doesn't represent the end of tensions and challenges, but it's a place where we can address these openly and in a problem-solving manner. There's a number of positives that I can point to, of achievements that already seem to be going in a good and positive direction. The automotive sector is now working with the steel industry on an import replacement strategy to purchase more South African-made steel that goes into the manufacture of cars in South Africa. And we're saying we need clear timelines for the localization of primary steel, work out the grades that need to be done here, what's the investment that's required. On electricity supply, there's an in-principle agreement with Eskom for a new arrangement around load shedding that represents a fresh partnership, a sharing of the resources in a more thoughtful way. Participating companies include ArcelorMittal, Score Metals, Highveld, and Columbus Stainless Steel. When this is finalized, we'll make a formal announcement, and an agreement will be finalized and signed and then implemented on a trial implementation basis. On scrap metal, Transnet has received approval to deviate from its traditional processes on scrap metal to support government's intervention to ensure availability of scrap metal for the consuming industry. And in future, scrap metal from Transnet will be made available to local ferrous and non-ferrous scrap metal users only. And the first of these would be, are expected to be completed by within the next month and a half. Illegal imports and illicit trade is being cracked down by the South African Revenue Service, and the Commissioner has taken a personal interest in looking at this and has made a call that industry should come forward with examples of this. The Continental Free Trade Area talks are moving forward, and the primary steel industry is now reviewing the export rebate offering for the downstream industry. On resource mobilization, the industry is working on the Steel Fund to establish it as a not-for-profit company with an interim board, constitution, and signatories. And some details have been put forward, similar to a development levy in other sectors. Now, I hope that within the next few months, we can land many of these planes and we can show concrete outcomes, that we move away from processes that are lengthy and detailed into ones that work in a world in which time is not our friend. The longer we wait, the more the opportunities go elsewhere. The more we try to refine and polish things to absolute perfection, the smaller the opportunities available for local manufacturers. So it's to be able to develop a new way of working, where we get to something that is good enough and we implement, and then we refine. And that's really what the Steel Master Plan is about. COVID-19 has demonstrated and continues to demonstrate to us the fragility of global supply chains with the unprecedented disruptions we've had. Even before the president announced the first lockdown last year, parts of the auto industry was already closing down because their supply lines were disrupted. And if ever there was an argument for deeper levels of localization, the recent past has demonstrated that to us. But localization has to be built on competitiveness, on dynamic sectors that don't rely fundamentally on protectionism. The state has to come in and utilize the tools available in the toolbox as and when needed, but always on the basis, how do we build the cost competitiveness, the quality standards, and the reliability of delivery of industry, so that that becomes the strong selling point. I look forward to working with the sector, to doing things in different ways, to recognizing that there will be pressure on manufacturers from government, and there will be pressure from government on labor, and there will be pressure from labor on manufacturers and government, and there will be pressure from manufacturers on labor and government, that this is not a process where we simply all sit and have a wonderful implementation. It's going to be tough. There will be difficult choices we have to make. But it's that represents leadership. The ability to think longer term and to accept that sometimes you need to make significant changes in the short term to unlock the opportunities elsewhere. That's what I look forward to. There are many people that I'd like to thank. I can't do all of them by name. I want to recognize the splendid work that Dr. Bernie Fenneroff did. He can't be with us today, but he's joining us virtually. He and the team from the DTIC has worked hard to pull together the thoughts and the ideas from industry and from labor. But above all, I'd like to really appreciate what the industrialists have put on the table and what organized labor is putting on the table. And that is the commitment to work differently. And so I wish this industry every success, like this factory that had reached a fork in the road. On the one side is close it, scrap the machines, sell out some of the productive assets to others elsewhere in the world with the energy and the drive to build productive sectors. That was one road available. We didn't take that road. We took the other road. The other road was to bring in fresh ideas, fresh management, a new can-do attitude, and a partnership within the workplace. Yes, it was tougher. It's easier to sell and it's easier to scrap and then to liquidate and take whatever you get out of it and see that capital base eroding, it's the tougher road, the harder road to rebuild. That's the choice South Africa faces. That's the choice that you as an industry has said, you are prepared to take this tougher, harder road of rebuilding the sector. So while I will welcome your signature on the piece of paper as the symbolism, I will welcome even more the hard work that I know that will flow thereafter. So thank you very much for joining us here today, and I look forward to a really strong and productive partnership between the sector and government. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this then brings us to the signing ceremony. And this signing ceremony is arranged as follows. We are going to ask the leaders of the different work streams in the master plan to come forward to sign the document. We would also ask the key partners, the key social partners and government partners to also do the same. So I'm not sure whether we're going to sign here. So we will be signing here. I'm going to ask Minister Patel if he can join the signing delegation. Ivan Jim from NUMSA, General Secretary. If he can also come. Marius Crocombe from Solidarity, so if you can also come through to sign. Mr. Kubas Fenter, the CEO of ArcelorMittal, if you can also come. Freddie Mungeri, CEO of Chem Mining, if they can also come, everybody. Okay. It's going to be too much. Okay. All right. I'm going to call out everybody, but I'm going to ask that you may perhaps just stand and then sign after the first group has signed. Okay. Mr. Elias Munare, CEO of Africa Power, African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And then Johan Stradom, CEO of Columbus Steel. CEO of Columbus Steel. Is he already? Okay. He is our lead on resource mobilization. Nonhlanhla Ngwenya, MD of Mpono Energies. Huh? Okay. And then Dumi Tesho, CEO of Dynamic Fluid Control, also in the transformation workstream. And then Ms. Portia Dabi, CEO or Group CEO of Transnet. So I'm going to ask that we start the signing, and as you finish, the next group comes in so that we will still observe. Thank you. Yes, please.
How are you?
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you.
Just fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
have ready. Mugeri.
Okay. Thumbs up. Mr. Mugeri, apparently you didn't sign one document and your partners say that's not good enough. If you could please come and sign it so that we do have a record that we're going to do all the commitments we committed to from a demand side perspective. So thank you for that. Apparently it's the last one. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this then concludes the formal part of our meeting today. Given that members of the media are also present, we thought that it might be useful that if there are any questions, we provide the media 10 minutes to ask any of the stakeholders that you would have seen signing the document, if there's any additional information the media requires. So I'm not sure if there are any questions to all the stakeholders, including the minister. Okay? We're going to do it in the next 10 minutes, after which we would then hand over to Deputy Minister Fikile Majola to then officially close the ceremony. Okay, there's 2 hands that I've noted. Are there any more hands? I would ask that you first introduce yourself, the media house from which you come, and then the question. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. It's Terence Creamer from Engineering News. To the Minister, just given what's happening in the steel environment at the moment and the unhappiness about pricing, the backlogs in supply, the Steel Master Plan, from what I can see, doesn't address the 2 big issues on the table at the moment. The one being protection and the other being the pricing methodology. Yes, it talks about rebates for those who need to import steel, but it doesn't have a fundamental discussion on pricing. So how do you think those 2 big issues are going to be resolved through the Steel Council in the coming months? Secondly, on the Steel Development Fund, when do you expect it will be established? Given that you're looking at a levy of between 5 and 10 rand per ton, I think you say. What size is that going to be on an annual basis? And how will that money be administered in a way that's not corrupt? And then lastly, how inclusive is this council? Because we're still hearing a lot of negative voices around the Steel Master Plan out there. Downstream industry seems particularly unhappy with the content of the plan. And I know that CIFSA represents 160,000 companies or workers, but how inclusive are the workers? Is the master plan of the workers in the industry as well as the companies in the industry, or is this just an elite meeting the elite? Thank you.
Thank you. Then we will take the second second speaker for I think the last set of questions.
Yeah, Minister John Fraser, ZA Confidential. Having looked briefly through the document, I see that you mention that you will be focusing existing incentives to try to support development of the steel industry. Is there anything new from the DTIC, or is all the funding, as Terence's question suggested, going to come from the industry itself?
Thank you. Are there any further questions before we close this? Thank you very much. Minister, the questions for yourself.
First, thank you very much for those questions. The nature of the speakers are such that we can't hear so clearly, so I hope I can paraphrase the questions and then respond to it. So first, with Mr. Creamer's question, as I understand it, it's on issues of pricing and tariffs. It's on the Steel Development Fund, and it's on the inclusivity of the process. Let me start with the pricing. I mean, clearly there are enormous challenges in any customer-supplier relationship. Every supplier wants more, every customer wants less in price. And what we are going to be doing now is addressing some of the cost drivers that influences that. And those cost drivers, I spoke earlier, Elias Monachi spoke about it, and Ivan Jim spoke about them. For example, a big cost driver in the steel industry is volume, scale. If we can get greater volume, both by clawing back part of the domestic market, but also by opportunities on the African continent, we want domestic prices not only to stabilize, but to come down. That's quite critical. Because at the end of the day, the industry has to be price competitive. The way to get there, we can debate, but the outcome has to be clear. It must be a competitively structured sector. Looking at tariffs, tariffs is something that you use when you need to for as short a period as you required. And we've come through a period where there was a particularly strong resort to steel protectionism in many different parts of the world. In the United States, the invocation of Section 232 was used to essentially exclude South African steel from the US market and South African aluminium products. We're in discussion with the American authorities at the moment to see where they wish to go with this, and we've made the argument very strongly to the US trade representative that South African steel is not dumped steel, that the quantities are not so significant as to hurt American industrial interest, and that those measures should be lifted. Domestically, we've used trade policy to try to buy a bit of time for the sector. But it's going to be investment that's the big driver. Investment, more competition, and the other elements of the Steel Master Plan that must be fundamentally a bigger engine than simply the utilization of tariffs. If we over-rely on tariffs, what we do is we take away the spur to innovation and competitiveness. So it's doing that delicate balance, buying a bit of time, and then getting industry to use that time to up its game. On the Steel Development Fund, there are now the finishing touches being done on the modalities of the Steel Fund. The team has put together some notes for me that they felt I could say today, but there's a bit more work that needs to be done. We'll make an announcement as soon as that work's completed, but the idea is that the Steel Development Fund would be run effectively by the industry, that it would be a resource that's available to help promote the long-term interests and future of the sector. And that's really the key to it, that we don't want another bureaucratic arrangement. I have said to the facilitator at the start that money should not come into government. That's not the ideal place, that you need a more flexible instrument that industry can see where that money is deployed to. Can I connect that to John's question before coming to the last part of it, and that is on incentives? John, we're not seeing that the fundamental driver for this sector is going to be a fiscal transfer in the form of an incentive. That's not going to be the main part of making this industry grow. It's going to be increasing domestic demand for steel. That can be and must be a more significant way in which the state can support local industry than by making, R500 million or R1 billion rand available through concessional funding or so on. Of course, the IDC will continue to make funding available, and we're rejigging the steel development fund that they have. But that's not the big game. The big game is going to be getting our infrastructure program moving from shallow waters to deep waters, really moving it on scale, and then introducing a localization requirement, not only on primary steel, but also downstream steel. That's really the big one. The other big one is expanding markets on the African continent for South African-made steel. So if we're looking for an incentive equivalent, it's not going to be fiscal transfers as much as it is going to be demand creation for the sector. Coming back to the last question that's been asked by Engineering News on the inclusivity of the process. This process has had an open architecture. Everybody was invited to participate, and participation has been across the range of opinion. We've had highly protectionist arguments from one side of the corner, as I indicated. We've had free marketeers on the other side of the corner. The Steel Master Plan tries to strike a fair balance between all of these. It's pragmatic. It recognizes that either excessive protection or a complete opening of the market to the point where we lose our primary upstream industry does not represent the best value proposition for South Africa. We've had across the range the opinions in the labor movement, from NUMSA to Solidarity. We've had different parts of the sector, different industrial products, different preoccupations. We've had businesses with a large export focus, and we've had businesses whose only work is in the domestic market. So that open architecture, I think, has served us well. Will it mean the end of any criticism? No, it won't. That's not our test. Our test just is, will it get enough, a critical mass of players together to do things differently? And we think I've been highly encouraged by what I've seen as people who've put very different positions in the public terrain forward, who in the Steel Master Plan process are actually working together. So I listen to, let's call it the public noise, and that's not where the big issue is. It's what do parties do to try to find solutions to the industrial problems that we have. There's a few, I hope, fairly big announcements that industrialists themselves will make in the next few months that I think if they are successfully concluded, as we hope they are, and as we will do what we need to do to support them, that will show the beginning of this turnaround. Finally, are there challenges are all the known challenges adequately addressed in the Steel Master Plan? No. By its nature, there are going to be challenges that we don't have the perfect answers for. So what we've done is we've created a forum where we bring together this range of views to continuously monitor what are those challenges and find solutions to it. So the Steel Master Plan, it's not a blueprint that you just follow mechanically from page 1 to the last page. It's an approach that says, let's work together. So yes, of course, it's got lots of detailed propositions. It's got all these task teams working and so on. But I don't want to lose that key idea that it's people. You know, if you run a factory like this, or any of the businesses that the industrialists run here, you know you've got your business plan. And that you give to your bank, and you give that to your investors and so on. And then you know there's the daily reality, where you've got to have troubleshooters who solve the problems that you didn't know 4 days ago you're going to hit today. And it's those businesses, not the businesses that have the most beautiful business plan. You need a good business plan, of course, but it's not the ones with the most beautiful business plans, but it's the ones with the managers who can navigate the problems that you didn't know about, or the problems that you knew about, but they come out in ways that you could not anticipate. We've just taken what you do every day in running your businesses, and we've brought that concept to the fore of the Steel Master Plan. So thank you very much. I hope I have given you that I've responded to all the questions that were asked. Thank you very much.
I think we've come now to the end of the meeting today and the signing ceremony. Our Deputy Minister Majola, will come in to give a vote of thanks. DM, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Program Director, Acting DG, Minister Patel, members, leaders of the industry, the leadership of our two unions, Marius and Jim, senior officials of government present here, members of the media. Minister Patel, thank you very much for having decided that the signing ceremony should happen here, where actual work takes place. It has been fantastic to be here. I was telling Elias and Ivan that I've seen the metal that won't bend, but Doran and his team here bend it. On behalf of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, I would like to thank all of you for your attendance to this groundbreaking occasion, the launch of the Steel and Metal Fabrication Master Plan. Your presence demonstrates your commitment to working together towards building an improved, competitive, long-term, sustainable steel value chain, as well as to harness the job opportunities that can accrue from this collective effort. I would like to extend an appreciation to Mr. Patel for his leadership in steering the social partners towards reaching consensus in a highly complex and traditionally fragmented industry, and for endorsing a very ambitious implementation plan. The Minister has already emphasized the importance of speeding up implementation and embracing the continuous improvement process. We need to bring new hope to the nation, to the workforce, the youth, and graduates who have aspirations to enter this important industry. The implementation process will require a lot of trade-offs and a balanced approach for the betterment of the entire value chain. The road ahead is yet to get steeper and requires all of us to remain fully committed to seeing the master plan reaching its fruition. I also thank Mr. Doran Barnes and the management of Hall Longmore for your hospitality and offering your plan to host such an important event. DG, now we can add to your role an additional job of hosting events. Thank you for steering this process and for the excellent program directing. To the officials of the department, Tandy, Misha, and the rest of the team, the entities, government and large state-owned companies, the industry, and labor will require continuous support during the implementation of this master plan. I know we are all ready and very open to making the necessary tweaks in our policies and instruments to reach the goals we have collectively set out in this master plan. Thank you very much to all the social partners, and indeed, we look forward to seeing a globally competitive, transformed, and job-creating steel value chain. Lastly, Minister, we would like to thank Dr. Benny Vanarov for the important work that he has done in
pulling together all the social partners up to this launch. I thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We are done. And thank you for your attention, your participation, and here's to a good master plan.